I am the villain.
I always thought that the third person would be both the hero and the villain in this case.
What? I mean, are you saying that I can't be the hero?
No, you can definitely be the hero. I have no
Okay.
problem with you being the hero.
And so you're the villain.
I would say that we're both. That's going to be
Alright.
my stance throughout this conversation.
Okay, so you're taking sort of a modern, perhaps a postmodern sort of philosophical viewpoint of heroes and villains, where it's not straightforward.
Right. Where your love of the hero makes him a villain, and where your hatred of the villain makes him a hero. So yes, very postmodern.
Well, what about, okay, but if you are saved, so a hero may be an arbitrary thing, but it's not to the person for whom, it's not to the person who has a hero. The person who is saved by a hero, for them the hero is it's their possibility, it's their hope, it's like the way out, it's the way out of misery. So, I don't want to get too postmodern here because then there's no life force. I mean, people live in a subjective, medieval, ancient, psyche in which we're not always just thinking in postmodern terms.
Yeah, you're right. I'm going to give up the postmodern twist right now. I was only being inspired by my hero, whose name is Deleuze.
What's his full name?
His full name is Gilles Deleuze, which is, if I was going to pronounce that the way it's spelled, I would say Gilles Deleuze.
And what nationality would...
He's French. He's a postmodern philosopher, which is why I started off with a postmodern thought.
And what were his prime active years?
From about 1950, 1960 to the mid-90s.
I've read some Deleuze. I like the way he talks. It's sort of like a pool that I haven't dived into.
It's a nice pool. It's a little complicated at first, but once you get in and stop trying to figure out the pool and just get in, that's when it starts to get good.
Question.
Yes.
Are there a lot of Deleuzians?
No.
And second question, is there an internet forum for discussion of Deleuze?
Not that I know of. To the latter, not that I know of. Though there's a lot of things on the internet that I don't know about. To the former, I would also say no. Only because he's not really taught all that much. And teaching a philosopher in philosophy schools is really what brings them to prominence in people's hearts. Because that's where most people discover them.
But now we have the internet, and in theory a philosopher can just go straight to the audience without having to climb the high walls of the ivory tower.
That's true. We're still operating from a time when they didn't have the internet. So his ascendancy was sort of muted when compared to other people around his time, like Foucault and Derrida, who came from the same time and place, but are more prominent. They're more featured in the philosophical discourse.
Deleuze wrote a book, I think it was in 1992, and the only reason I know this is because I saw it in Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble plug. Advertising. Product placement.
Where's our check?
And it was called What is Philosophy? And interestingly, he says it's usually toward the end of a philosopher's productive life where they start asking what is philosophy. But to me, it's funny because that would obviously... It's like, what is a philosopher? Is a philosopher somebody who... When do you become a philosopher? Before or after you do philosophy? You know?
Yeah, I really like how he starts off talking about aging and about friendship. He the introduction is about these things. So, who's your hero? Enough about me.
Oh, I have heroes. I'm so familiar with my heroes that for me, they are who I am. You know, like, they have just become part of me. And I basically have...
So let's go back to what you were saying at the beginning. You asked if you could be the hero.
Right.
And I'll give a different answer that's not, but now that I've gotten my Deleuze plug in there, I'll back off from the postmodernism.
Mm-hmm.
And let's think about what it really means. A hero is somebody who you love and who you admire.
Okay.
So you asked if you could be the hero to who?
And
really the important thing is to whom.
Who am I the hero to? Because in a way, it's more of the hero archetype. It's the activation of the inner archetype of the hero and the projection of that onto somebody in the world, which gives a person permission to grow and to become their whole self. Like for me, so what's funny about heroes is I can speak to it quite specifically because my first hero was Joseph Campbell, who wrote a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. In other words, my hero was a guy who specifically philosophized about the nature of heroism. And which is great because now we're not just talking about heroes in some kind of fantasy world, we're saying the philosophy of heroism. In a way, Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, it's not known as a philosophy book, but it is a philosophy book in the sense that it is the philosophy of what is heroism. What is like you would say, the archetype of the hero, the idea of a hero, and to make it a concrete category and to elevate it to a specific thing instead of just casually having like, oh yeah, Superman's my hero or something, to have, to talk about it objectively, to make it a scientific study in a way. Although, unfortunately not everybody would agree Joseph Campbell's study of the hero is scientific, but that's a different point.
We can get onto that later. I'm not too familiar with Joseph Campbell. Could you just tell us a little bit when he was writing, where he was writing?
Well, he's a total badass, and he was born in 1903, and he died or thereabouts, and he died in 1986 or thereabouts. And he's a really cool guy. He was like a track star and a jazz musician, so he had a lot of talents. But he was also sort of a massive introvert, and he loved reading books. And then he traveled the world, and then he ended up teaching for many years at Sarah Lawrence College, which is, at the time, was like an all-female college. And he met his wife there, so I kind of admire his dating expertise. He just gets a job in an all-female college, and there's like an infinite supply of people you could... who might be the one.
Joseph Campbell, you dog.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he's actually, he's hugely influential. He, Star Wars and like the Star Wars trilogy was based on, George Lucas wanted to make a movie, but he was hugely influenced by Joseph Campbell's, Hero with 1,000 Faces, and probably his other books. But I know, in other words, Star Wars is like the manifestation of Joseph Campbell to a large extent. So is like The Matrix, but and Hollywood uses Joseph Campbell's ideas a lot because the basic arc of a character growing throughout a movie is like the hero's journey. And I don't know. I feel like I travel amongst people who know who Joseph Campbell is, and so I'm giving you. Maybe I should. Well, I'm just sort of like.
I think we should make clear that this episode doesn't, because we're talking about our heroes, doesn't mean that you need to go and research them. I think our whole point here is to share. Well, it's more about the process of having a hero and why these guys are our heroes and what it's done to us personally, as opposed to, oh, you should go read Deleuze. Oh, you should go read Campbell.
But really, for me, it's it's about finding a way into yourself. For me, Joseph Campbell represented a pathway by which I could own my true self in a world which had no interest in my true self, was not interested whatsoever in who I was. And that is kind of a sad world, that there's so little interest in who I was. But Joseph Campbell, basically, I saw him and I'm like, well, that's, he existed. He existed, which means a guy like that, and I'm a guy like that. I am a guy like that.
His existence makes you happy.
Viable. It makes me viable. It means there might be a place for me.
Right.
If there's a place for him, then there is a place for me.
Yeah.
Because I see myself in this guy.
So I've read precisely 5 words by Joseph Campbell.
Well, you're missing out, son.
The words are A Hero with 1,000 Faces.
He's really famous for 3 words.
words.
He's famous for a 3-word saying called "Follow your bliss."
That's a good saying. But I just want to take that title, since it's about heroism, and I want to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it brings us to an important point. One question I was going to ask is, can you have more than one hero? But before you answer that, the title reminded me of another question, which has to do with how many people can hold the hero as a hero, right? To me, A Hero with 1,000 Faces speaks to the face of the person he is a hero to, right? A hero to 1,000 people is kind of one direction.
I mean, the trick to the name of that book is that it's a study of the similarity between the hero archetype in all different cultures, from primitive, orally transmitted tribal cultures to the written cultures to modern cultures, and it's basically a survey of all these cultures and an attempt to illustrate how the core pattern of the hero is the same in all these cultures. And so, in other words, each culture has its own hero, and yet the underlying archetype of the hero exhibits common features. And so that book is really about trying to describe the common features of the archetype of the hero, regardless of which human society you're in.
Right, so in a way, not defining hero as something personal, but defining hero as something cultural or societal, a hero as...
Well, the archetype is not even cultural society. The archetype would be human, you might say. The archetype is a human archetype, which is why it has 1,000 faces, because in each culture you go to, you find a different face of the hero. Like in our culture, it would be Luke Skywalker, or Neo from the Matrix, or those would be really good examples of.
Or Superman, you mentioned before.
Yeah, Superman. I don't know. I'm not as big on Superman.
But you are.
It's hard to ignore. Like when you think of heroes.
Luke Skywalker.
What's that?
But you are big on Luke Skywalker and Neo.
Yeah, I mean those are, to me, those are like.
What makes Luke Skywalker so good?
Well, he's strong with the Force.
Well, he was learning the... I mean, Yoda is stronger with the Force.
No, so is the whole Skywalker family is strong with the Force.
Uh-huh.
It runs in the blood. It ran in the gene pool.
I guess they're sort of two similar heroes because they ascended to their... Right, like they didn't start out... They weren't born as heroes. They became heroes through fate, like through what happened to them.
Yeah, the hero is a combination of a natural predisposition and a consent to fulfill in the world the calling that comes from that predisposition.
Yeah, I realize we're talking about two different conceptions of hero. I mean, we're talking about both.
Yeah, well,
we're both talking about both, but I just want to make it clear. I started off this episode talking about my hero, as in the concept of my hero, and we've moved to a really good place, I think, which is the concept of a hero, right? A hero to many. And how do we define that?
But presumably Deleuze is a hero to more than just... I mean,
right, but he's not an archetype. The archetype of hero is a totally different conversation.
No, but so in other words, at least you are not consciously aware of his activating an archetype in you.
Well, okay, so that's a little different. Say a little more about that. I like that.
Oh, well, I mean, a hero, if they activate an archetype in you, then, in other words, they bring out the hero in...
Fair, yeah, right, yeah, like, right. I might think of it as being a little different. I would call it the hero's object.
Or they bring out the poet, or at least the appreciator. They bring out the recognition of virtue and of
Yes.
excellence.
Yes. That's another good definition of what a hero is.
They allow people to differentiate virtue from just ordinary life, ordinary existence.
Yeah, they give you an example of virtue.
Yeah.
They give you something to strive for.
So, do you want to be Deleuze?
That would be pretty nice, I think.
Mm-hmm. What would be your second choice if?
In terms of a person?
No. In terms of if you couldn't be Deleuze, like what would you have to settle for? Do you think you are Deleuze?
No.
Do you think you are at that
level?
Despite
the fact that I started out by saying that he's not discussed very much, he's discussed quite a lot more than I am. So I'm certainly not him right now.
Yeah, but
I also can't
he
write
probably
like
wasn't
him.
you when he was 30
and
either.
I haven't read as much as he has.
But he wasn't him when he was 30 either, right?
Yeah, but I think he had already read more. So what I like so much about Deleuze is he gives these incredible close readings of not only philosophers. He started out with philosophers. He wrote a book about Henri Bergson. He wrote a book about Nietzsche. He wrote a book about Hume.
Yeah.
He wrote a book about Spinoza. These amazing, generous readings of these guys.
Yeah. He's not disparaging them or belittling them or putting them in
a
little cubby hole.
It's all positive. I mean, I remember this line from his book about Bergson where he says all four of Bergson's books fit together. He makes some sort of argument where he says he coheres it all together. You know, he brings these four texts together, whereas other people I'm sure have said, oh, this book contradicts this one. He said, no, they all agree with each other. So that's Deleuze's mode. He just brings these things together and he gives this generous reading of things. He also does it with artwork too. He has a book about Francis Bacon, the artist. He has a book about other stuff that I can't think of right now.
Francis Bacon was also like a scientist?
Yeah, but different Bacon.
Oh, different Bacon.
There's a painter, Francis Bacon.
Oh, different Bacon.
Who's a hero to many.
Oh.
He's sort of a tragic hero. I don't know why I call him that.
God, there's a lot of Bacon. There's like Roger Bacon.
I don't know who that is.
He's just another Bacon.
Bacon.
I'm just joking around. Do you think we, where do you want to take this? Where do you want to steer this train?
Well, I want to start to answer some of these questions about heroes. We haven't really spoken about villains yet either. Let me just round out this thought about Deleuze because it brings us back to the question at hand. What I like so much about Deleuze is that he made heroes out of all these guys. He took Nietzsche, he took Hume, he took Bergson, he took Spinoza. Really interesting guys. Guys who weren't necessarily heroes in their time. And he just turned them into these heroic figures. He just gives them so much depth. And to me, that goes to the very heart of what a hero is. Right? Deleuze is a hero who made heroes.
Do you see yourself as somebody who gives depth to other people? Or, I mean, do you see yourself as that?
Well, I certainly read into things a lot.
Well, do you want to be like
What I like so much about Deleuze is he's so coherent. He's so concise. He just says things and like splat. It slaps you across the face. I really like that. I admire the way he writes. And I would like to write like him. I try to.
Yeah.
But we can't really say whether or not I am. We can only really define him by his impact.
I know, but I'm trying to understand where you're coming from.
Right, you're into motives.
Yeah, I mean,
want to understand how I'm motivated to do this.
I'm trying to figure out like your underlying psyche.
Right.
You know, because like for me, like why would anyone have a hero other than Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, Edward F. Edinger, Robert A. Johnson, or Marie Louise von Franz? Like for me, it's just so patently obvious that those are the reasonable heroes to have.
I believe that Deleuze, Nietzsche, Spinoza, and Bergson and Hume are far better heroes to have.
Nonsense.
I think you bring up a good point, and psychoanalysis is a great place to take this. I often thought, we mentioned it last week too, I've often thought of this as being somewhat of a therapy session for both of us.
I guess, it seems to me that if we are talking deep stuff, I guess I'm getting a little nervous now about who's listening and why.
Well, nobody's listening just yet. Or very few people are listening just yet.
But I listen to our podcast. I know how these things work. Eventually, somebody's going to download our podcast.
So what are you worried about?
The entertainment factor, for one.
Certainly something to be concerned about. So you gotta make it funny, man.
No,
funny and serious.
It's fine. But I'm just saying, I'm worried about it, so what are we going to do?
We're going to talk about heroes and villains.
Fine. I have a lot to say about these things, but, anyway, I basically have 5 heroes, and they all met Carl Jung at some point.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought Carl Jung was going to be your hero, but you mentioned Joseph Campbell first.
Well, Joseph Campbell was my first hero. I liken Joseph Campbell to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Carl Jung to Yoda.
Okay.
Like Yoda is the Jedi you go to once you know what being a Jedi is all about. Once you know the basic, deal. You have to have met, a normal Jedi and sort of been basically initiated into just the basics.
Uh-huh.
Before going to Yoda. Yoda is like the Navy SEALs. Whereas Obi-Wan Kenobi is, Army basic training. So you can't go straight to the SEALs. Or maybe you can, but let's just assume that you can't, for the sake of this argument. So that's what Yoda is. Yoda and Carl Jung is hardcore learning how to use the Force. But you already have to sort of have achieved a certain ranking before you can go to Jung, I would say. Because while Jung does appeal to a certain section of the population just as is, just flat out, people are drawn to him, I wasn't like that. I evolved for a long time before realizing how important Carl Jung was and how much I could learn from him,
Yeah. So do you think that's an important part of finding a hero? You have to be sort of poised for them? Or might you say, well, it doesn't really matter when you find him. When you find your hero, you'll know, it won't matter
a hero
how prepared you are.
Well, from my perspective, a hero essentially saves you from the situation you're in. A hero is how you get out of a situation you find yourself in, and you have to first find yourself in such a situation.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you were describing sort of a training that has to happen, though, before you meet your hero. And I'm wondering, might that be necessary?
Well, I've come to the conclusion that Carl Jung is, the comparison to Yoda is incredibly apt. Because nobody would just go to the Dagobah system. Nobody.
Sorry?
The jungle planet that Yoda lived on.
Okay.
The prequels don't matter, we all know that. Let's push them aside and talk about Yoda. The real Yoda. The one from The Empire Strikes Back. I have to calm myself down. I was about to start talking about Star Wars and
okay, yeah,
calm goodness down. And badness.
Calm down, Zach. Yeah, I mean, you yourself were worried about the entertainment value of this podcast.
Yeah, so. I mean, I just don't want to be another podcast that talks about Star Wars.
Okay, let me try to bring us back, and with your permission, I'll just continue to do this. I'll just interrupt you and bring us back.
It's the Ethan and Zach podcast. Without Ethan, it's
it'd be a dyad.
Yeah, it'd just be
How
Zach.
How boring is that?
Zach
it'd just be Zach and
the white light.
Yeah, the other. All right, so bringing it back to our topic, heroes and villains. I had something to say, and it just slipped away.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to force you to repeat all your stuff. Oh, okay, yeah, right, I got it. Do you want to be a hero?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't. It's kind of a confusing thing because the only good way to be a hero is when you're not trying. When you're literally just fulfilling your destiny, and somebody else looks at the way you fulfilled your destiny and decides you are a hero.
In
other words, you are a hero because somebody else needs you to be a hero. They are in a position where they need to be saved from something.
Mm-hmm.
And then they look at how you're living your life, and they decide you're doing it in a heroic way. You are being a hero. And so you can't deliberately be a hero. You just have to, live your life, and other people will make you into a hero when they need a hero. If you can do it, if you can live up to that.
Yeah, I guess we're finding ourselves back into a similar conversation as last week, which is about free will. I mean, I would say that you can try to be a hero, right? You can you can find heroes and try to be like, you can emulate your heroes.
Well, I got totally interested in the idea of being a hero, and I did try to be a hero, and the net result was that it wasn't anybody else who thought of me as a hero. It was me who lived up to my own standard for the way I think people should live. So I was able, for the most part, I've been able to live up to the standard by which I, at one point, decided a person ought to live up to.
That's not being a hero, though. You're talking about somebody being ethical, just somebody being, or virtuous. Like somebody being virtuous is not a hero. A hero is somebody who gives you new virtues. Right? A hero is somebody who defines virtues for you. Not somebody who just lives up to them.
But that's your opinion, and I think you're only partially conscious of that, because you're saying that as if everybody believes what you just said, but I think of that as a subjective thing you just said. That's how you think of a hero. That's what you think a hero is.
I suppose. But, I mean, I'm disagreeing with you about... so you're saying that a hero is somebody who...
Look, the thing about wanting to be a hero is that it's almost always fraught with unconscious instincts, which turn out to be instincts everyone has. Like, I don't want to be a hero. I want vagina.
Whoa.
No,
okay.
I brought my sex drive to consciousness.
You brought it to the air. That's what you did.
Entertainment factor.
You gotta have a little sex.
But the sex drive is ever present, and people always have it, and they're either aware of it or they're not.
Okay, so let me get.
But the thing is, everyone wants vagina.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
That's my point. Is that just because I want vagina doesn't mean not everybody else wants it.
The answer to my question is no. You do not want to be a hero. You want vagina.
I think I am a hero, but not because I want to be. And I don't think wanting to be a hero makes you a hero. You have to just... You have to be a good person, I guess. And then other people at different times and places will make you into a hero. They will decide...
Okay, so you're saying okay, right. I think I get the distinction. You're saying that you can already be a hero before you have followers, let's say. Let's call them followers. We need a word for this. You can be a hero before you have followers. I'm saying that the followers make you a hero. Once you have enough followers, you are a hero.
Well, but I think you're not acknowledging the individuality of heroism. Like, every little kid, a little boy who has a dad who from their perspective does the impossible. Like, their dad does stuff they couldn't possibly do because they're not grown up yet. But their dad is their hero for them.
Right, dad is a good one. Yeah, I thought about that when we started talking about when we first started. But dad is a good example of
That's for a man, the dad traditionally would be the first hero. It'd be the first idea of that's the real hero.
Which brings us back to psychoanalysis, which I think is a really appropriate way to go with this.
Well,
we have to start thinking about what the father means in psychoanalysis.
It means a lot. You can spend years on this.
Yeah.
And go.
Yeah, I will go.
Go on.
I will go on.
Go on.
I will go on. I'm gonna bring us back to the postmodern world. Start talking about another semi-hero of mine, Jacques Lacan, who taught me that the father and the concept of castration have to do with language and the signified, if I'm not mistaken.
Go on.
And if I'm to paraphrase correctly, this man who can no longer correct me, I would say that the father is the end of the real, where the real is the world without language. The father comes along as language. Right, and the story goes that you start off loving your mother and wanting to be the mother starts off as your hero, and you in turn want to be her hero. But then you learn that the mother actually wants other things, namely the father, and so you start to resent the father, and that results in a castration. And really all of that is just to say that you start off with a symbolic castration. You start off with your perception of the world before it has meaning and words wrapped around it.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you lose something. You lose the mother, and the father comes into the picture. And so the only reason I tell this story is because it's interesting that the father is so often the hero, when psychoanalysis would really tell us something quite different.
But, it doesn't really take that much of a psychoanalyst to I mean, the whole sort of American cliche is, the father plays catch. He plays catch with the son. And
so the whole conception of the father being the hero is also a cliche.
It's a cliche, but
I don't really believe that.
Yeah, in other words, but I had that when I was a kid. I thought my dad was like a hero. So for me, it's it's an understandable cliche.
Well, I'll just repeat what you said to me before. It's subjective, right? For you, it's that.
But what you're telling me about you're telling me you didn't have a father figure who activated your inner hero.
Maybe I've just for the listeners and for you, I have an awesome father. I often think of him as my hero, but in a different way. Not like Deleuze's.
But did you ever think of him as a real man, somebody who gets stuff done? Because that's how I thought of my dad. And that was my original hero figure.
Get what kind of stuff done? Fixing cars and stuff like that?
Just stuff. You got a problem, my dad... This is when I'm a kid. Eventually I realized, my dad has huge limitations. But when I was a kid, he was he didn't have any limitations. He was the man. He was literally the man, but he was figuratively the man in the sense that the man is the guy who gets stuff done.
Yeah.
The powerful man who is capable, who can get stuff done. I don't know how else to say.
I'm afraid we're coming across as sexist to our listeners now, as well as being narcissistic.
No, okay, but that's a different topic, though.
Let's just set it straight. Zach and I are speaking all sort of symbolically. When we talk about the man and we talk about castration and stuff like that, we're not sort of.
What vagina are you scared is going to run away because you are being sexist?
A lot of them. My sister, for one, since we're talking about our families. So, I mean, let me offer my story, because I think it'll help to explain why I'm interjecting right now with this gender-neutral stance. So, I grew up with two good parents, and I never looked to either of them as particularly, all-knowing, all-doing, is all-powerful. I never looked to either of them as a hero. I suspect that I always sort of saw past it. I never really felt like I was in a position where, I always realized their limitations before I always already realized their limitations. I never had that feeling of they're my hero. I got what was going on from an early age. They're providing for me, but I'm an individual. I have to be my own hero. Otherwise, I'm nothing. I can't look to these other people and think of them as being all powerful, all heroic. So, I am sensitive to to the fact that we're two guys talking about this. We're already sort of tipping the balance in a certain direction. So I want to make sure we don't lose half our potential listeners.
No.
Right at the very beginning.
No, you're missing the...
I'm missing the point.
We're not losing any...
Give me the point, Zach.
Any listeners we lose, it's because... It's not because of sexism. We didn't lose any because of sexism. We just didn't lose anybody because of sexism. Besides, controversy, if we courted controversy, we would get listeners. We wouldn't lose them.
That's true. Alright, well, we're coming close to a half hour, I think.
Alright, commercial break.
Let's take a commercial break. We'll be back.
Listen to my fine composition.
We'll be back. We'll talk about the composition.
The theme song.
We'll keep talking about heroes and villains. The name of the song that you're about to listen to is Hero, I will point out.
I think we're going to stick with heroes.
What is a villain?
I don't know. I don't like to focus on the negative.
Okay, so a villain, straight off the bat, a villain is something negative. I think that's a good jumping off point. To me, a villain is somebody that you hate. Simple as that. A hero is somebody you love, a villain is somebody you hate.
Mm-hmm. Do you hate Hitler, or is he just... Is Hitler...
Well, I'm with
what's
you.
The deal with Hitler?
I'm all about the positivity, man.
Okay.
I don't believe in villainy? That's what we
Right.
decided it. Villainy, right?
Right,
I like
villainy.
villainry more.
Villainy.
This half of the show, I'm going to say villainry. Because I'm the
Villainry?
villain this time.
Villainry? It's like an armory.
Yeah.
It's the villainry.
Exactly.
It's where they hammer out a new villain.
So yeah, as much as it's tempting to make a villain out of Hitler or
Hitler's too easy.
Pol Pot,
We're not adding anything
Or-
new here.
Shakespeare,
Saddam Hussein.
Shakespeare. I threw that one in there. Why not? Why don't we turn a hero
Montesquieu.
into a villain?
Who's the guy, the French guy in the 1500s who, Montaigne.
Montaigne.
I'm like, there's a villain. A foul villain.
What made him a villain?
He's too much of a gentleman. He's too good. Which means you just gotta hate the guy.
That's right. A villain could be somebody who's so good that they're bad.
It's like Sting.
Doesn't every hero kind of have that, though? They're just so good. Like, they don't possess the tragic. Right? The perfect hero is just completely devoid of the tragic, which makes him bad in a way.
Disney.
Yeah,
Disney.
Disney's a good example.
Like, Ursula the octopus.
Yeah.
From The Little Mermaid.
Good example of a villain.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah, she scared
Poor unfortunate souls.
Jesus out of me when I was a kid. Try not to curse now, even though I'm the villain.
But true.
She scared the shit out of me when I was a kid.
Yeah. So Disney's, I didn't mean Walt Disney. I meant the Disney films. The villains in the Disney films. Did you think I meant Disney?
No, I did not think you meant Disney. He would be considered a villain, I think, by many, because he was, a neo-Nazi or something?
Because he's too perfect. He's too fucking awesome. He's freaking Disney. I mean, he's, like Disney, they own everything now. They own everything.
I think people would think of Walt Disney as being a villain for different reasons than the fact that he made The Lion King and Aladdin. I don't think that's what makes him bad. Although, we're getting back to the idea of somebody being so good that they're bad.
What about, Wile E. Coyote?
Wile E. Coyote? He's a tragic villain.
He's so bad. He's good.
Yeah, that's true. Because he's the protagonist of that. He is the hero of that show. Right? The Roadrunner is the villain.
In a way.
Yeah, this elusive bird. That's fucking bird.
But you don't normally... I can't... I mean, my instincts rebel against the idea that the Roadrunner is the villain in this case.
Why?
Because he's just got such a nice smile, and he's so happy. And his only crime is life.
That's true, he just likes to run. Although, isn't he the one setting up all those, like, things that the Coyote runs it? Like, did he set that up?
No,
or, like,
Coyote,
somebody else set that up?
Coyote sets it up.
So Coyote does himself in by setting up, like, paintings that overlook a cliff. That
they're
look like
they're Rube Goldberg devices that, like, one thing leads to another, and then eventually the thing blows him up instead of, like...
So you're saying Wile E. Coyote is, like, schizophrenic who doesn't even, like, he does things in one personality and doesn't even realize it, and then, like, goes to a different personality.
Honestly, that's usually, to me, that's the most compelling type of villain, is the one who's his own worst enemy.
Yeah. That.
Okay, so join us for the next episode.
No, come on, we owe them a little more than just that.
I know, we were just starting to get a roll on.
Yeah, we can't lose that roll.
We kicked it up a notch. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong.
So now... But, I don't know, honestly, I don't like talking about villains. Well, I have enough trouble keeping my own self straight.
The concept of a villain's really interesting, though. I think discussing what a villain means will lead to a lot of good discussion.
I don't know. I mean, we've gone to the dark side. We've turned to the dark side.
We sure have. Darth Vader right there.
Yeah.
Peeking his head up. But without Darth Vader, you wouldn't have Luke Skywalker. Right? You need a villain to have a hero.
But that doesn't mean you want to, like, get coffee with the guy.
I don't want to get coffee with Darth Vader. I just want to explore the idea of his necessity. Yeah. Yeah, he takes it black.
Alright.
Luke Skywalker takes it sweet and light. Light and sweet. It's so weird how these concepts take on... Like, light and sweet is always the good. And dark and bitter is always the bad. I drink my coffee black, by the way.
It's not that I can't talk about villains. It's that I prefer... See, I could go into Jungian psychology.
You can if you want to. He is your hero.
Yeah. See, in Jungian psychology, there is a thing called the shadow. And everyone has a shadow. Mm-hmm. And typically, if you hate somebody else, it's usually... If you hate them disproportionately, if you hate them in an uncanny way in which, like, not everyone... Like, you hate them, but the people... Other people... you're the only one who hates them. Or you hate them especially.
Yeah. I like to think of...
That's your shadow. In Jungian psychology, that's not... In other words, Jungian psychology is about not projecting evil into the world. But it's about recognizing the evil in oneself.
I like that definition of villainry. I want to offer one that's a little different, although we could probably tie them together. Which is, when you have a villain, you're just misunderstanding something about them. And I'm going to tie this back to my definition of a hero, and my hero, Deleuze, whose gift was the ability to see into others. It's to find meaning, to peel back the onion and keep finding new layers. And in that sense, a villain would be somebody who you just can't, or you won't, or you don't want to peel back the layers. But this would imply that there's no such thing as a villain. That a villain is always a hero waiting to be discovered. That you can still find something to love about all these people.
I guess it's actually raised an interesting point, because I was talking about how people make other people into a hero. And the same is true for villains. Right.
There's no essence of a villain. It's something that comes to be by...
There is if you watch cartoons or movies.
Yeah, but we've moved past that.
We're moving into, like, the real world.
Yes, the real. We're into the real now. We've moved past... We've been castrated and we're back from the dark side.
Castration. Forgive me, but you can't say we've been castrated and not have me completely redirect the conversation toward...
Okay, fair enough. I misspoke. I misquoted. I misparaphrased Lacan. We've realized what castration is, and we've opted out of it. We've opted to view the world.
To put it mildly.
We've opted to view the world not for what it tells us it is, which would be Disney telling us that good is good and bad is bad. We've opted to see the world for what it is, which, to a certain extent, is nothing. In other words,
it's amoral.
There is no objective good and evil. There is no such thing as a hero. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no such thing as the hero archetype a priori, right? We come to define the heroic archetype.
But, I mean...
Ooh, I upset him now. Alright, go on. I started talking about archetypes.
There is, yeah. I mean, I guess I'm shocked.
I'm shocked.
I'm
That's
shocked.
the worst thing to hear, Dad. Why'd you have to tell me that you're shocked? Okay.
Where did you find these? How did you learn to do this? I learned it from watching you.
Welcome to the Ethan and Zach Trio, a show where
one of us plays the father.
One of us plays the father and the other plays the son. In this episode, I am the son and Zach is the father.
Where did you learn to do this?
I learned it from you, Dad.
Learned it. Parents who do drugs.
Alright, let me bring us back. So, archetypes, that's a Jungian idea, right? This is your hero. Yeah. I'm bashing your hero right now. So stop me.
Well, just, you can say there's no archetype of the hero, but tell that to, a little kid who watches the Transformers. The old Transformers. I mean, the movies are fine. I mean, I don't mind the movies. Some people... for me, it was the Transformers. When I was growing up, that was...
Transformers is an interesting one because the Transformers are never the... I would never think of Optimus Prime. I haven't seen much, but I don't think of Optimus Prime as being the hero. There's always, another kid, right? There's Mark Wahlberg somewhere in there.
There's always, a young person who's, Optimus Prime may not be the protagonist, but he is the hero.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm mixing up the two terms. I mean, the protagonist is not necessarily the hero. It's just often the case.
Castration.
Let's talk about castration.
I mean, I'd rather talk about...
Transformers?
Well... Vagina.
Oh, yeah, right. You mentioned vagina. Do you want to elaborate a little more on what you mean by vagina?
There's no castration.
You can't castrate a vagina.
And why would you want to? I mean, you can do, female genital mutilation.
You could.
And they do that in certain cultures.
Right. But, I mean, we're talking about the concept of castration, not the practice of it. I don't think anybody wants to castrate anybody. I think it's something, Freud and Lacan would just have it that it just happens. It's part of the human condition.
But I want to ask, what in God's name are they blathering about?
To me, it's language. Something very profound happens when you put words to things. And they're trying to uncover what that means. Perhaps they took it in a direction that's a little too familial, a little too unitary. To me, it's a little more multiple. It's a little more we could come up with 1,000 analogies that don't involve the family, that don't involve the father and the mother. But it doesn't change the fact that something really profound happens with language.
But, most people would think castration and language are two different.
I know.
They're different.
I know, but the fact that somebody...
I want to agree with you. I want to understand.
Well, Jung, there was somewhat of a disagreement between Jung and Freud, right? I don't know much about that. Can you tell me a little bit?
There was a disagreement between Jung and Freud.
Mm-hmm. Come on, man. Jung's your hero. Make him mine. Tell me what...
No, he can't. he's only a hero to people who need him at the time that they need him. Like, he's a hero for people who need him to be a hero. And
hogwash. You were talking about the hero archetype.
Jung is a big deal, but the simple fact is, the stuff he's talking about is not for everybody. There.
All I'm really interested in is what makes him special.
He absorbed really powerful psychic forces, and he did an admirable job of bringing them down to earth and giving there's a lot to say, because archetype in its raw form is kind of like one of the Greek gods. In a way, the Greek gods are a good example of how the archetypes manifest when there is not a whole lot of consciousness. Mm-hmm. They all do their own thing. Mm-hmm. They all fight each other, and none of them care about each other.
Right.
There's no unity. There's no one god. It's all just war and fighting and bickering.
Yeah.
And all these archetypes exist in the human psyche. They're instinctive. They appear autonomously. You don't need to ask for them. They just appear. Mm-hmm. And so, the way you bring them to consciousness, the way you manage them is, you want to get to a situation where you can see you can put all the gods in one room. Mm-hmm. You can put, if there's two different forces that are really strong and powerful, if you can bring them to consciousness, you can tell good stories about them, and you can bring them into the same space consciously, and then figure out sort of how they relate, and the way any two archetypes will relate would manifest in sort of a combined archetype, like another archetype, which would be the activation of the many archetypes as they interact, insofar as they have habitual interactions, and sort of they interact in habitual ways. The end result is that you basically need consciousness, which in Carl Jung's case was a lot of writing. The legacy, at least, was a lot of, it was his ideas, but his writings and the people he interacted with, the interactions with other people. And he was able to bring a huge amount of raw instinctive power, which in the old days would be gods, into the possibility of discipline. So you can turn it into, mastery. It's like, instead of being affected by music, you learn about music theory and you learn about how music works, and you eventually can master it. Well, the same thing's true about psychology. Is you will be affected by these archetypes unless you understand how they relate to each other. And Jung did like an incredibly important job of relating huge and important and massive numbers of archetypes with each other, giving the 20th century the possibility of contextualizing their circumstance, of recognizing their circumstances rather than just like they would in the olden days, just being completely victims of instinct.
Yeah, I like that. You gave me a lot to chew on there.
I'm glad you liked it.
It's like beef jerky.
Jerky.
Chew and it's still more flavor. But yeah, the gods is a good one. And you're talking about the gods and then the people, for lack of a better word. The non-gods, the mortal.
Yeah.
And how the mortal give meaning to what the gods do. The gods' actions take on a new meaning when mortals are involved.
Well, I mean, from a scientific point of view, human beings invented the gods, you know.
Yeah, but we're not scientists. We're mystics. We're philosophers.
Yeah, but you have to be reasonable about it. I mean, you have to understand that gods are psychic defense mechanisms. You know, the god is a way that a human being can deal with his own psychic nature.
Yeah, well, as is the concept of castration. as are the concepts of heroes and villains. These are all mechanisms. These are all things that we create that help us.
We unconsciously create them. We don't choose to create them. And the Jungian thing is that there's an unconscious and there's a collective unconscious, which means everyone can create this. Everyone will unconsciously create the same archetypes under the right circumstances, given the circumstances that produce that archetype.
Mm-hmm.
So you say we create them, but you have to watch the language there.
Mm-hmm. Correct me then.
Well, they in a way they create themselves. They assert themselves is the way I usually would say it.
Oh, I like that. It is something a priori. It is something that's sort of latent, that's already there before anything else is there.
Yeah.
That just kind of like manifests itself through what happens.
Yeah, but that's perfectly consistent with the view that if you really look at human beings, they're not that conscious. They're not that aware of what they're doing and why. For the most part, consciousness is in the minority. Things of which people are aware constitute the minority of what people usually do.
Right. Well, we are still animals. We are still mortals.
We have a biological legacy.
Right.
The only reason we're here, at least from a materials standpoint, is genetic transmission of DNA from one host organism to the next.
I'm going to go ahead and agree with you on that one. Even though I think within that, there's a ton of beauty. There's a ton of opportunity. There's a ton of potentiality. Right? Like the very fact that art exists is reassuring to me.
Well, you're threatened by it because you're feeling like... So for me, it's not even a threat. I must have moved past the stage in which acknowledging that that my organism has a biological heritage. It feels like a threat.
Well, the threat is that that's it. That you are only DNA, and your only job is to pass it on. That's the threat to me.
But the thing is, the evolution has always had, to put it in a sort of moralistic term, winners and losers.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that there's always been losers, which means those losers didn't pass. They existed, but their job wasn't to pass. You know, there's always just going to be, like genetically you have winners and losers, but that doesn't mean our job is to pass on our DNA. That's not our job. There's no job.
Right.
You know, there isn't a job. There's no job.
Yeah, it's just we want to win.
We're not being employed.
I know we're not being employed, but we want to win. It doesn't matter if we're being employed or not, we still want to win. We want to win.
What's funny though is that in a way we don't want to win. It's our biological heritage that wants to win for its own purposes.
So we're sort of distinct from that.
I think so.
Yeah, because I think the trouble arises when people start to think of themselves as being one and the same with this empty drive to reproduce. That they start to feel that nothing matters anymore. If you're generous enough to see yourself as distinct from that, then there's plenty of opportunity for all this other cool stuff to happen.
I just think like it just from it's stupid to say, oh, you don't have any kids, therefore God doesn't love you. Basically, you know, I don't think that not having kids equals God doesn't love you. I just don't. I don't see that.
Well, let me rephrase it. You don't have any kids, therefore you've failed. I think is a position that people more often take. These days.
Well, they're allowed to take it, but the simple fact is there's enough kids.
That's true.
Like you can be one of the people who adds your kids to the kids, you could be one of the people who doesn't add your kids to the kids.
Third person here. Zach and Ethan went on like this for a while, so I'll spare you. but we'll post the full conversation somewhere. Someday. Maybe we'll release an extended version in 20 years or so. The Redux. It will be awesome. Well, that's it for this episode of the Ethan and Zach and me trio. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or any other podcast app on your smartphone. And tune in next week. Okay. Bye.